Hi, everybody. As promised, here is the rest of the World War II lecture. So we started off with during class, we talked about how the different governments, different countries throughout Europe had kind of switched to this fascist, totalitarian government. You have Mussolini in Italy, you have Stalin in Russia, and you have Hitler coming up through Germany. We talked about how Hitler gained power and how he changed the democratic government that was put in place by the Treaty of Versailles, and he's turned it into a totalitarian dictatorship in the Third Reich. And we talked about how he moved into the Rhine area, which was lands, German speaking lands previously owned by Germany, taken away by the Treaty of Versailles, and his explanation to the world that the reason he went into this demilitarized zone was because the people there were German speaking. They wanted the German government to be part of back of Germany, and that he promised that he would not move any further, that he wouldn't do anything else, that he just wanted to recapture these lands, and the world kind of kept a watchful eye on Hitler. I'm not going to say, but they allowed him to do so. So we're going to start. That's where we left off in class, and so this video is the rest of World War II for you guys. So going ahead and getting started. So Czechoslovakia, which is no longer a country, Czechoslovakia has split, but Hitler had turned to Czechoslovakia next. So after the Rhine zone, he had moved into the Czechoslovakia. So about 3 million German-speaking people lived in Czechoslovakia, in an area called Sudetenland within Czechoslovakia. And so Hitler took his now gross military. Remember, he has built up the German military in direct violation of the treaty. And he has moved in, and he moved them to the border of Sudetenland, which is this brown part of the picture, if you can see. And Germany is right there all along. And so Hitler said that these German-speaking people in Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia, and it kind of goes along the German border and into Austria, it was the next area he kind of had his eye on. So Hitler makes a deal with the Chamberlain of Munich. He says that he wanted the attack on Czechoslovakia is going to happen. He's going to invade and liberate these German speaking people, because that is right now his mission, is what he is doing. He is liberating the German people from the suppression of the Treaty of Versailles. And Hitler invited the leaders of the French and the British to meet with him in Munich. And Italy was there too, but they were on the side of Hitler. So Hitler invites France and Germany, whose job is to ensure that the Treaty of Versailles is being withheld. And he promises them at Munich that he's now taken the demilitarized zone, and now he's going after Sudetenland. And after he took the demilitarized zone of the Rhinelands, he said that he was done, and now he's going after Sudetenland. And Germany and Britain said, "Hey, you were done. You weren't going to take any more land. What are you doing?" And he goes, I'm sorry. I promise. These are German people, German-speaking people. They want to be part of the German back in Germany. I promise this is my last territorial demand. I won't do it again. I'm just trying to unite the German people under one country, one flag, and this is what those people want. So at the 1938 Munich conference, he meets with the Prime Minister of Britain, and then he meets with the Prime Minister of France, and he says, "This is going to be my last one." So in this picture, you can see to the very far right, you have the British Prime Minister, and then you have the French Prime Minister, and then you have Adolf Hitler in the middle, and then you see the Foreign Minister, or the Italian leader Mussolini, and then his Foreign Minister right next to him. So The British and the French believe they're going to take Hitler at his word, and they signed the Munich Agreement in 1938. And so in this agreement, they decide to turn over Sudetenland to Germany. So he doesn't have to take it by force. He doesn't move a military in there. There's no exchange of gunfire. And he gets what he wants. And so England comes back, and the prime minister says, I have come back from Germany with peace and honor, and I believe that this is peace of our time. Look, the Treaty of Versailles is working. We're able to work out these issues diplomatically. We went and talked this out. There is not going to be any war or anything like that. So look, we have peace of our time. Hitler's now satisfied. He has all the German lands that were taken away and from the Treaty of Versailles back under the German. Everything is peachy keen. However, there are critics out there who were not as eager to take Hitler at his word as the Prime Minister of England and the Prime Minister of France were. And some of these critics, particularly future Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who eventually would become British Prime Minister during World War II, said, what are you doing, guys? Why are you appeasing this guy? Why are you just giving up what we set on as our principles? We set as a League of Nations so that we are going to uphold these principles, that we're going to keep them in line. And the first time he comes begging and he says, pretty please, you're just going to roll over and be like, okay, well, you asked nicely, so okay, you can have what you want. No, that's not what this is supposed to be. And so Church and Wetzel goes, what's going to make him stop asking for even more land? Like, what? You just rolled over, and all you've done is told him that if he shows some type of military presence and then bats his eyes at you and says, pretty please, you're going to give him what he wants. So what's going to stop him from then taking more and more? Like, we need to have some rules and boundaries. So, and Churchill was absolutely 100% right. So despite the Munich Agreement, almost right after, Hitler goes, I'm going to go ahead and expand my empire just a little bit more. And so he signs that in September of 1938. So now in March of 1939, not that far long after, he takes his German troops into what is the remaining part of Czechoslovakia. And at nightfall, he decrees that Czechoslovakia has ceased to exist, and that now all of Czechoslovakia belongs to the German Empire. And so once he takes Czechoslovakia, he then turns his attention to Poland. And Poland was the buffer country between Germany and France. And Poland was also the buffer country between the USSR. And so when he moves into Poland, that's when Russia and France and Germany and Great Britain go, okay, enough. Stop it. You can't do this anymore. You promised the Munich Agreement. So you've broken the Treaty of Versailles. You've broken the Munich Agreement. You've taken Czechoslovakia. Now you're trying to take Poland. And so tension started to rise. And Stalin, however, he's with France and Britain at the start, saying you need to knock this off. But the whole time he's telling Britain and France that he's on their side and that he's going to help get Hitler to knock this off. He's having a backdoor conversation, a secret conversation with Hitler. In fact, he signs this non-aggression pact with Hitler. And so Stalin is a totalitarian communist government. Hitler is a totalitarian fascist government. So they kind of have that kind of same similarities in each other. And so Stalin goes to Hitler and goes, okay, I will not interfere in this war that you seem to be trying to pick with Britain and France. You seem to be on a mission to piss them off and to go to war. I'm going to let you do your thing if you promise never to enter Russian lands. If you leave Russia out of it, I will not help Britain and France stop you from what you are planning on doing. I won't interfere. And Hitler goes, oh, okay, sure, promise, deal. I promise I will never go into your lands. Have we not seen what Hitler has been doing? He promises whatever they want to hear, and then he does what he wants to do anyway. I don't know why anyone is still making agreements with this man, because he's broken every one he's ever made. But now the bitter enemies of Russia and fascist Germany have vowed not to attack each other, and Russia bows out of the conflict. So now it's France and Britain standing up to Germany by themselves. And so Hitler starts his plan of attack of taking Poland, and it's called the Blitzkrieg of Poland. And so on September 1st, 1939, he sends his air force over Poland, and he just starts dropping bombs. He is dropping bombs left and right and just bombing. And he targets airfields, military bases, and railroads and cities. And he's doing this very strategically. He is cutting off Poland's resources. He is cutting off their ability to attack his air force back. He is cutting off their railroads so that they can't ship in supplies, including food, medical supplies, not just military supplies. He's cutting off all transportation into Poland. So if you're coming into Poland, you're coming in, like, you're coming by land. So you're going into Poland. He's cutting off their military bases. He's bombing the military bases so that they can't form an attack back to him. And so he bombs for days. He carries these bombs. And then as soon as the bombing is done, he sends in his tanks. So imagine bombing for days, just bombing, and then a massive amount of tanks rolling into these cities and into the countryside of Poland. And so after the Poland invasion, Britain and France say, okay, we're going to war. You obviously can't keep to your word. We're calling it. Like, someone needs to knock this off. And if no one else is going to step up to put you back into your corner, we're going to do it. So they declare war on Germany, but it was too late to save Poland at this point. He has taken Poland. But they want to not only liberate Poland and send Hitler back to Germany, so they declare war. And so this Blitzkrieg strategy of his, or also known as lightning war, with fast-moving tanks and powerful aircrafts, is a formula that Hitler is going to use throughout World War II. And he's going to change it a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. So then why he's blitzkrieging Poland, he's taking Poland, Stalin started attacking the east side of Poland. So Stalin and Hitler had agreed during their pact of not attacking each other. The way he kind of sweetened that deal was Hitler said, well, I will take Poland and I will give you the Russian-speaking half of Poland, and I will take the rest of Poland if you help me take it. So Stalin goes, okay, I'll help you take it. So he starts attacking Poland. And Stalin, so in later 1939, Stalin attacks and defeats Finland, who was trying to come to Poland's rescue. And he takes Finland, and then Hitler, having gone through Poland, has now taken Norway and Denmark. So he is now, by the end of 1939, Hitler has taken Czechoslovakia, or the Rhineland, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Norway, and Denmark. Stalin, who is working not with Hitler, but alongside Hitler for his own personal means, has now taken Finland and part of Poland. So here's a political cartoon, and I love this political cartoon because it just illustrates what's these two men so perfectly. And it's Hitler bowing to Stalin, saying, "The scum of the earth, I believe." And Stalin bows back to him and says, "The bloody assassin of workers, I presume." And it's basically them, and there's Poland dead on between the two of them. So it's this political cartoon. So Stalin and Hitler start on this role of trying to both serve each other's best interests and taking what lands they want. This is not good. You have two very egotistical men who are working with each other as far as it benefits themselves. But eventually, the two are going to turn on each other. You know that's going to happen. So after occupying Poland, Stalin starts to annex Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And these are really small countries that border Russia. And so he takes those as well. And he goes, Hitler's doing this and no one's stopping him. So why is anyone going to stop me? I mean, if he's doing it, I can do it. And so they both start doing it, and they board each other. So as long as the two of them don't attack each other, it seems like a really good plan of them both kind of serving their own interests. So meanwhile, Hitler is now taking the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So as you guys can see, we have this Germany's right here. So he's taken, you have Germany, and then you have the Netherlands and Belgium, and they're boarding up to France. So it's only a matter of time before Hitler is going to now take and turn his attention onto France, and which is exactly what he did. So from World War One and the trench warfare, which was very common in World War One, the French start building these trenches along the Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium border along France. And he builds these they build these series of trenches and fortifications on the eastern part of France. And their thought was that they would be able to stop the German troops from coming in. The problem is that technology had advanced by this point, and tanks technology particularly had advanced since World War One, and they now have these kind of chained caterpillar ways. You know how modern day tanks look with the wheels, and it's this big long chain. So the tanks can now just go right over the trenches. They weren't big long enough to where they can just move them over. So Hitler's troops and tanks just go right through these trench lines that the French had built to try to save France. So France falls fairly quickly. So with Italy now allied with Germany and entering the war, they invade France from the south, and the Germans are invading from the north, and therefore France is fighting a two-front war. And it wasn't long before the Germans took France. So in 1940, within a year of this starting, France surrenders in June of 1940 to Germany. And after France fell, the French general who was fighting the troops flees to England, and the French government, all of the French government flees to England and sets up an exile government in England. So they have now Germany now occupies France, but the French army and French government is now hiding in England. So at this point in 1940, if you look at this map, everything in red is under German control. And as you can see, he starts in 1939, guys. So in 1939 to 1940, in about a year, about 18 months, he has taken almost all of Europe. The blue, Great Britain, is the only country still free and still fighting. Green is now all under Stalin's control, and yellow is staying neutral so far. So Ireland, Sweden, Switzerland, Portugal, and Spain have so far in 1940 stayed neutral, but they're neutral because they are playing nice with the Nazi government, particularly Spain. It was also a fascist government at the time. So all these countries are cooperating with what Hitler wants, and so he hasn't taken them yet. Eventually, a lot of them are going to fall, or they're going to join the other side. But here's a visual of what it looks like in 1940. So now that he has taken pretty much all of Europe, or controls all of Europe, with the exception of Stalin and Italy. But Italy is basically the kid brother to Germany at this point, and Mussolini does whatever Hitler tells him, and Stalin isn't doing anything that Hitler tells him, but they're not at beef with each other. So far, they're still their motives are very parallel with each other, so they're fine. So now Hitler can focus all of his attention on Great Britain. And so the Battle of Britain is going to begin. So in the summer of 1940, almost directly after the fall of Paris, Hitler starts to attack England. And his idea was similar to what he had done in Poland. He is going to bomb England until they surrender. He can't move his tanks in because England is an island. So his idea is that if he just sits there and bombs them repeatedly over and over and over and over again, that eventually that they would surrender. So for every night for 2 solid months, guys, that's 60 days, 60 nights, every single night. And they did it at night so that the British couldn't target their planes and couldn't see where their planes were and shoot them from down the ground. Every night for 60 days, he dropped bombs on military bases, airfares, again, railroads, and particularly cities. So this is, if you've seen movies in this time period, the people in the big cities, like in London, they would all live down in the subway tunnels. They would all go down at night and stay in the subway tunnels, because when the bombs dropped, that was the safest place for them to be down below underground, because above ground there's bombs being dropped. So here is, you can see a picture of them flying into London and dropping these bombs. So the Royal Air Force starts to fight back. They develop a new device called radar. It's something we still use today, which allowed them to be able to target these planes and see them at night without actually having to see them, knowing where they were. And with the radar, British pilots start to spot the German planes in the darkness, like I said, and they start attacking. The British also come up with this idea of the Spitfire plane, and that's a plane that just had really rapid fire, like machine gun, but a little bit faster fire. And they start to attack back, and they actually take out about 175 planes in one night on September 15, 1940. At this point, the U.S. still hasn't entered the war. However, they are sending volunteer fighters to go and help fight. So a lot of American Air Force airmen asked for a volunteer deployment, where they went and they fought in the British Air Force, but they were Americans fighting for the British. So 6 weeks later, so after this 2 months of just bombing, Hitler finally calls off his attack of England. He's realizing his strategy of bombing them isn't working, and England is fighting back. And so we're going to stop with the war now. We're going to switch our conversation over to the Holocaust. So why all this is happening, why all these battles are happening at the exact same time, Hitler is implementing the second part of his plan, if he wrote about in Mein Kampf. And in this second part of his plan, he talks about the purification of the German people. Now, when he talks about the purification of the German people, he doesn't mean actually people are German. He talks about anyone who's now under his control. And his idea of purifying is to get rid of anyone who is Jewish. So he starts the Holocaust actually when he first comes into power in 1933. And he says that non-Aryan, so anyone who isn't of that like blonde, blue-eye, white Aryan race, he removes them as soon as he gained power. He starts removing all of these people from government jobs. And then he starts the first steps of the purification of the Holocaust. And during the Holocaust, 11 million people across Europe, more than half of those whom were Jewish, are going to lose their lives in the Holocaust camps. So he targets the Jewish people in particular. And he had a lot of anti-Semitism tactics that he used. Now, the Jewish people have always been a target in Europe, and there has been a lot of anti-Semitism feeling of Jewish people throughout history, throughout Jewish history, particularly in Europe. And many Germans believed that Jewish people were the reason for their hardships and their troubles. Jewish people at this time held a lot of prominent jobs or small business owners. And so they felt that some people felt that they had weathered the storm of the Treaty of Versailles and the after effects of World War I a little bit better than most. But what this is generalization and scapegoating. You can't say that one religion, if you belong to this religion, you automatically are better off economically. Religion doesn't work that way. Religion is faith. And so, but he used that. He would point to these people who are well off, who happen to have the religion and the religious faith of being Jewish, and said, look, they're Jewish, they're better off than you. Blame them. blame their religion, and that's just not right. But that's what he did. And so he starts taking rights away from Jewish people. And he starts restricting their rights, and he starts making them wear these yellow stars to identify themselves as Jewish. And in 1935, he stripped them of their citizenship, their jobs, and their property, and he starts moving them into the ghettos, which are these small sections of cities that and he said, you guys have to leave your homes, leave your property. You don't get to take anything other than what you can carry in a suitcase, and you have to move into these ghettos. So he starts, and then he also starts killing them off. And then in November 1938, the Nazis' Hitler's private army starts attacking Jewish homes and business and synagogues across Germany. And he has these basic kind of like a riot tendency in these attacks. And then in the aftermath of it, when these people wake up the next day and people are like, why are these businesses and these homes being attacked? He blamed them on, he said, he announces to the German people, oh, it was the Jews who attacked it. They're rioting against Germany. They're trying to loot the stores. But really, it was Jewish stores that got looted. It was Jewish people who got attacked. It was Jewish homes that got burnt. But then he blamed it on the Jews. And so hundreds of these are pictures of a synagogue getting burned. So Jews start to flee Germany, and some of the Jews that fled Germany are like Robert Einstein, Thomas Mann, Tillich, a lot of scientists, a lot of people left, and they fled to countries who were willing to take Jewish refugees. Some of them went to England, some of them came to the States. The U.S. actually ended up taking about 100,000 refugees, and gave them the ability to move here and live here without fear of being chased down. And we said that we would protect them. So American Jews feared that Jews would take jobs at a time when unemployment was already high in the United States. And this one of the examples of the indifferences of German Jews can be seen in this case of St. Louis, when they came here to Miami seeking refuge, and instead they were sent back to Europe. We said that they weren't allowed to enter, and this is at the height of this. And the ship was returned to Europe, and more than half of the passengers were then put in part and killed in part of the Holocaust. So it's not the finest moment in U.S. history. So eventually, in 1939, he started taking the Jewish people out of the ghettos, and he moved them into what he called the final solution, which is the concentration camps. So in this picture, you can see there was 3.2 million Russian Jews, 3.3 Polish Jews, Poland having some of the worst concentration camps throughout the war. There was 210 German Jews, 300,000 Jews in France. You can read the rest on your guys' own. But these are the people that he is targeting. So in the final solution, he moves them into these concentration camps. And in the concentration camps, he kills them by shooting, by gas chambers, by starving them to death, by overworking them to death. I mean, these are horrific conditions, just complete genocide. And it's some of the worst things I have ever seen or studied. I took a Holocaust study class in college, and I still have nightmares from some of the stuff that we read and looked at in that course. So Hitler condemns the Jewish people to death and calls them enemy states. But he also, not only did he target Jewish people, but he targeted Gypsies, Slavs, Jehovah's Witnesses, African Americans, Chinese, anyone who was considered homosexual. If you were handicapped in any way, Bell's palsy, any kind of special needs, if you were mentally ill, or if you were mentally deficient in any way and considered not a pure part of the race or not able to better spread the genetic seed that Hitler deemed plausible, you were sent into the concentration camps. Jews were by far the worst targeted. They ended up losing 6,225,000 people to the concentration camps. Soviet prisoners of war later in the war, once the Soviets had joined the Allies powers, there was 3 million Soviet prisoners who were then died in the concentration camps. 300 million Polish Catholics died, 700,000 Serbians, about 80,000 Germans who either opposed him politically, religiously, or just helped hide Jewish people were then sent to the camps and killed. 70,000 handicapped Germans, 12,000 homosexuals, and about 2,500 Jehovah Witnesses all died in the concentration camps. So the Jewish ghettos in Poland, this is a map. You can see all the ghettos throughout Europe. So these were where they started in the ghettos and work camps, and then later moved to the concentration camps. And these concentration camps were some of the worst, in history. This is just so devastating. It's hard to talk about even now as I'm teaching it. But if you guys imagine going into this room, this is the gas chamber at Dokchu, and they would tell people they were going in to take a shower to be cleansed before they would go into, and so they would walk in, and then the gas would come up from the floor, and people would slowly die. So here are some images from, and they're very disturbing. So if this is going to be upsetting to you guys, if you don't like them, please feel free to skip forward about 30 seconds to a minute ahead, and you guys can skip these images. So here is the main entrance into Auschwitz, the ex-internment camp. Here are some prisoners that were taken out to the wood and just mass shooted. These are some of the children, and these are mass shootings. These are the bodies afterwards. And some of these pictures, these are two soldiers who liberated the Dokchu concentration camp. And these are just very upsetting. So let's move on to the United States entering into the war. So the United States enters the war on the second half of the war, and they enter the war because Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, and they attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th. About 5 million people 5 million Americans enlisted after Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was the first time the U.S. had been attacked on U.S. soil after the War of 1812 by a foreign country. We had women who fought in World War I or World War II because we just needed the people, and they served as nurses, support staff, and all Americans started to fight in the war. And it was we started to mass produce. We turned all our factories into military factories that were producing ships and planes and tankers and guns. We mobilized our science force, and they started researching and developing new ways of warfare. They focused on radar so that they could use radar in submarines, and they used radar. And from there, we also, through World War II research and science, we found penicillin and other pesticides. And of course, the most important discovery, not important, but the most well-known discovery out of World War II scientists' research at the time was the Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb. And most of the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project were European Jews who had come to the United States seeking refuge. So this is more about U.S., and I'm going to kind of skip over these sections just because you learn more about that in U.S. history. So I'm going to kind of move on to those. So now that the U.S. had focused now that the U.S. had entered the war, we entered on the side of the Allies, and we started using our new technology. So in this map, you can see this is the Battle of the Atlantic, and this is where all those red dots are where Allied merchant ships had gone down. The green dots are where German U-boats had gone down, and these are all the different battles in 1945 and 1943 in the middle of the war that had gone down. So in the Eastern and Mediterranean front, Hitler had wanted to wipe out. So now at this point, Hitler has attacked Russia lands, and so now the Russians have entered the war on the side of the Allies. So now the Allies consist of Britain, France, United States, and Russia. And the other side is mainly Japan, Italy, and Germany and Spain on the Axis side. So Hitler had wanted to wipe out Stalingrad because Stalingrad was Russia's main industrial city. And so in summer of 1942, the Germans, so this is 2 years after they had taken over Europe together. 2 years later, the Germans' offensive starts attacking the Soviet Union. And by winter of 1943, you see a kind of a shift in the tides of war, where the Allies start to see a lot more victories on land as well as at sea. So the Battle of Stalingrad is a huge battle that takes place for weeks. The Germans had pressed on Stalingrad, and then winter set in. And as we have learned from when Napoleon tried to take Waterloo and from World War I, European countries are not successful fighting German or fighting Russian forces during a Russian winter. And the reason why is that they're just not prepared for the weather and the conditions of winter in Russia. Russia is severely cold, and it takes a lot of weather protective gear, and also just knowing how to survive in that kind of environment to be successful. So the Germans had sent their forces there in the summer, and so they were in summer clothing, summer uniforms. And then Russia's winter sets in, and they just can't survive. So the Germans end up surrendering in January of 1943. However, the death toll is pretty high, with 1 million men in the battle dying from the Soviet side and even more from the German side. At this point, in the war in early 1940s, they had moved into Africa, and we are now fighting the wars on 2 continents and at least 3 oceans. So this is truly a world war. The U.S. are fighting. The Allies' troops landed in Casablanca and Algeria in 1942, and so the U.S. are fighting in Africa as well. And this is mainly the Mediterranean side of Africa that they are fighting. So they're fighting in Italy as well. At this point, the Italians have kind of switched, and the Allies have easily taken over Sicily. And the king has now been able to regain control of Italy, and Mussolini is stripped of his powers. In fact, he's actually eventually killed by the own Italian people. They capture him, they hang his body. They hang him, torture, and then leave his body up in the streets for people to torture for 3 days before they finally cut him down. So Hitler's forces continue to resist. However, they're not very well now that we have the 4 sides kind of coming together. So the Allies liberate Europe, which is known as D-Day. And that was on June 6th, 1944. So 5 years after the first start of the war, Hitler has now started to lose Europe. So he is lost. So D-Day is June 6, 1944. It was the largest land and sea operation in military history. Despite the air support, German retaliation was brutal, especially on Omaha Beach. And within a month, the Allies had landed 1 million troops, 567,000 tons of supplies, and 700,000 vehicles. So here's a picture of Omaha Beach on D-Day. And here are air paratroopers coming in. So France is liberated in September of 1944, followed shortly by Belgium and Luxembourg. And FDR, who's now the President of the United States, is continue. So now the final big battle of World War II is going to be the Battle of the Bulge, and that happens in October 1944, and where the U.S. have Allied forces have entered in Germany, and they have it was a tank war at start, and the Germans lose the Battle of the Bulge. The Allies start liberating the concentration camps, and by 1945, they had taken Berlin. In April of 25th, 1945, the Soviet Unions entered Berlin as well, and Hitler was in his underground bunker in Berlin, and on April 29th, he ends up marrying his longtime girlfriend, and then he writes this long letter in which he blames all of World War II on the Jews. It was never his fault. He did nothing wrong. And then he takes the coward's way out and swallows poison and kills himself. So that is the end of my lecture on World War II, the European chapter. I will be posting another video here shortly about the Pacific Theater. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Bye.